Jack had always known the harshness of life in the Wild West. With a ranch that stretched for miles, he lived alone. The days were long, filled with hard work, and the nights were colder, spent under an open sky with nothing but the wind and the stars to keep him company. He had left behind a life in the busy towns, finding solace in the quiet solitude of the land. But deep down, Jack knew something was missing. His heart, once full of hope and excitement, had grown empty over the years. He had seen his share of trouble: cattle thieves, storms, and the ever-present tension between settlers and the native tribes. But he never imagined he would find himself caught in a situation that could change his life forever. It was late afternoon when Jack was riding his horse along the trail, heading back to his ranch after a day of checking the cattle. The sky was painted with shades of orange and pink as the sun dipped behind the mountains. The land, vast and endless, seemed to stretch on forever. As Jack rode, he kept his eyes peeled for anything unusual, his instincts honed over years of living on the frontier. Suddenly he spotted something in the distance. At first it was just a figure on the ground, barely visible against the dry earth. Jack's heart skipped a beat and he urged his horse forward, his mind racing. Was it a traveler in need of help or something far more dangerous? As he drew closer, the figure became clearer. A young woman lying face down on the ground, her clothes torn and covered in blood. Jack dismounted quickly, his boots kicking up dust as he hurried to her side. Her skin was pale and her breathing was shallow. His eyes widened as he noticed the unmistakable signs of abuse: bruises, cuts, and the scent of something foul. She was in trouble, and it was clear she wouldn't survive much longer if no one helped her. Jack's first instinct was to turn away. She was an Apache girl and he knew the risks. The Apache and the settlers had been at odds for years, their distrust and hatred running deep. Helping this girl could bring danger to his doorstep. But the desperation in her eyes, even unconscious, told him that he couldn't leave her to die. His mind raced. What if her people found out? What if they came after him for helping her? But as he looked down at her fragile form, something in him stirred. He could not just ride away and leave her like this. He couldn't turn his back on a life in need. She was human, just like him, and that was all that mattered in that moment. He carefully lifted her into his arms, his muscles straining with the effort. Despite her small frame, she felt heavier than he expected. Her body was cold, and Jack's thoughts flashed back to the days when he had lost others close to him. But this was different. He could not ignore her suffering. He mounted his horse and held her tightly, his heart pounding in his chest as he turned his horse back toward his ranch. The journey was long, and the ride seemed to stretch on forever. Jack's thoughts were torn. He knew the risks, and yet the idea of abandoning her felt worse. When he finally arrived at his ranch, the sun was setting, and the sky was turning dark. He carried her into his small cabin, laying her gently on the bed. Jack had never been a man of many words, and the silence between him and this stranger felt strange. But there was no time for hesitation. He went to work grabbing the first aid supplies he had: bandages, water, and herbs he had learned about from old ranchers. He cleaned the girl's wounds carefully, trying to ignore the unsettling thought that helping her might put his own life in danger. But he pushed it aside. He had saved a life today, and that was all that mattered. For hours, Jack stayed at her side, watching over her as she slipped in and out of consciousness. He kept the fire going in the hearth and occasionally checked on her, his thoughts restless. Who was she? Why had she been left for dead? And most importantly, what would he do if her people came looking for her? But as the night wore on, a soft sound interrupted his thoughts. The girl stirred, her eyelids fluttering before she opened her eyes slightly. Jack froze. Her gaze was weak but sharp, filled with confusion and fear. She looked at him for a long moment, as if trying to understand whether he was friend or foe. "Who are you?" Her voice was hoarse, barely a whisper. Jack took a step back, unsure of what to say. He had never been good with words, especially when they mattered the most. "I'm Jack," he said simply. "You're safe now. I won't hurt you." The girl's eyes narrowed, as if weighing his words carefully. Then, as if deciding something, she closed her eyes again and relaxed, her body still weak from the trauma it had endured. Jack sat in a chair nearby, watching over her as she drifted back into sleep. He knew he had made a dangerous choice, but at that moment, he couldn't bring himself to regret it. His heart, which had been closed off for so long, had opened in a way he hadn't expected. He didn't know what the future would hold, but he knew that for now, he had done the right thing. The girl was safe, and that was all that mattered. The next morning, when Jack woke, the girl was still asleep. He could see the faint rise and fall of her chest, and for the first time in a long while, Jack felt a sense of calm settle over him. Maybe helping her was the start of something new, something he hadn't known he needed. But the dangers were far from over. Jack knew that the Apache would not simply forget what had happened. He would have to protect her, even if it meant putting everything on the line. But for now, as the sun rose over the horizon, Jack knew one thing for sure. He could never go back to the lonely life he had before. The girl had changed something in him, and he wasn't sure where it would lead, but he was ready to find out. Days passed since Jack had rescued the young Apache girl, and with each day his life became more uncertain. He had taken a great risk by saving her, and now as he tended to her he found himself unable to turn away. The girl, whom he had come to know as Ayana, had begun to regain strength, though her recovery was slow. Each morning Jack would bring her fresh water and food, careful to stay out of her way. He had made it clear to her that she was safe, but he could sense that she was not fully trusting. He didn't expect her to be. After all, she had been through much worse. As she grew stronger, the two of them began to speak more. Ayana's voice, though weak at first, gradually became clearer. She told him little about herself, only that she had been captured by a rival tribe, and that her people would soon come looking for her. Jack didn't push her to tell him more. He knew that she had suffered greatly, and he respected her silence. At times, when she was feeling stronger, Ayana would sit by the window, staring out at the vast land that stretched for miles in every direction. Jack would watch her, his heart heavy with the knowledge that she could leave at any moment, and that when she did, he might never see her again. It was a feeling he didn't know how to handle. One evening, as the fire crackled in the hearth, Jack found himself sitting across from Ayana. She was looking at him, her dark eyes searching his face. Jack shifted uncomfortably, wondering if she was going to say something. "Why did you help me?" she asked suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. The question took him by surprise. He had never really thought about it in those terms. His response, when it came, was slow, as though he had to gather his thoughts first. "I didn't think it was right to leave you out there," he said quietly. "You were hurt. I just couldn't walk away." Ayana studied him for a long moment, her gaze unwavering. Then, with a faint nod, she returned her attention to the window. Jack could see that she was lost in thought, her mind likely filled with conflicting emotions. He knew that she was grateful for his help, but he also knew that deep down she was still thinking about what would happen when she had fully recovered. Would she stay? Or would she return to her people where she belonged? The following days were much the same. Jack would go about his daily work, checking the cattle, repairing fences, and tending to his land, while Ayana rested inside the cabin. Sometimes she would help him with small tasks, but Jack could tell that the physical strain was too much for her. He encouraged her to rest and let her body heal. As time passed, Ayana became less withdrawn, but there was still a quiet sadness about her, a longing for something he couldn't understand. Then, one afternoon, everything changed. Jack had just finished working with the horses when he returned to the cabin to find Ayana standing by the door, looking outside. Her stance was tense and her expression had a faraway look, as though she were listening for something. Jack's heart sank. He knew something was wrong. "Ayana?" he called, his voice careful. She turned to him, her eyes wide with fear. "They're coming," she said in a soft voice, her words laced with dread. Jack's pulse quickened. He knew who she meant. The Apache tribe would not let this go. The moment they found out she was alive and being cared for by a settler, there would be consequences. Ayana's eyes filled with sorrow. "I have to leave," she said, her voice breaking. "They will come for me, and if they find me here, they will destroy everything you have." Jack's heart wrenched at the thought. He didn't want to let her go, but he also knew that if he kept her, he would be putting his entire ranch at risk. The Apache were not a group to be taken lightly, and Jack knew that once they found her, there would be no turning back. Ayana looked at him, her expression pained. "I am grateful for your kindness," she said quietly, "but I cannot stay. My people would never forgive me for abandoning them. And you would be in danger." Jack couldn't speak for a moment. His emotions swirled inside him, frustration, fear, and a deep aching longing. He had risked everything to help her, and now it seemed like he was going to lose her anyway. But in that moment, he realized something he hadn't fully understood before. He cared for her deeply, more than he had allowed himself to admit. He didn't want her to go, but he didn't want to put her in danger either. He stepped closer to her, his heart heavy with the weight of the decision he had to make. "I can't let you go alone," he said softly. "You've been through too much. Let me help you." Ayanna looked at him, her eyes searching his face as if she were trying to read his heart. For a moment it seemed like she was going to refuse, but then she sighed, her shoulders slumping. "I do not want to leave," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But if I stay, I will bring nothing but trouble to you." Jack felt a surge of emotion rise in him. "Then let's figure this out together," he said firmly. "I can't change what's happened, but I won't let you go back to that life alone. You don't have to face this by yourself." Ayanna hesitated, her face softening. She had spent so much of her life fighting, surviving, that trusting someone else was difficult. But in Jack's eyes, she saw something that gave her a flicker of hope, a promise that she didn't have to carry this burden alone. The moment stretched on, and for the first time, Ayanna smiled, though it was a small, tentative thing. "I don't know what will happen next," she said, her voice steady. "But I will stay. For now." Jack nodded, a sense of relief washing over him. He didn't know what the future held, but at that moment, he knew one thing for sure: he wasn't alone anymore, and neither was Ayanna. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the land, Jack and Ayanna stood together, knowing that the journey ahead would be dangerous, but they also knew that together, they could face whatever came their way. For the first time in a long time, Jack felt hope stirring in his chest, and for Ayanna, there was a glimmer of warmth in her heart that she hadn't known in years.